Right now, Pittsburgh's best sports show is about to begin. Call us or tweet us. We've got things to talk about on the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call.
All right, thanks a lot, Jess, and thank you for tuning to Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. I'm Rich Walsh. We're taking your phone calls tonight, 412-575-2600. We'll also be joined by Chris Mueller over at the 93.7 The Fan Cam. And Chris, by the way, looking at that video of the pizza, I have to say I was one of the judges. I helped them get into the winner's circle. The pizza was excellent. Detroit-style pizza has won that competition over at Odyssey for the last 2 years, but this one was a really good one. Bloom's Brews out in West Newton.
Detroit, Rock City. They probably had to twist your arm, huh, Richie, to get you to participate as a pizza contest judge, huh? I bet you they were just,
Bubba
Richie,
twisting
please.
my arm. You know what?
Exactly.
But I anchored that night. We did this show. I had to be at your studios right there at 6 in the morning, and then I had to come back here and anchor all night. But it was worth it. I think I tried 43 pieces of pizza. It was unbelievable.
Richie, what can I say? Maybe I have to take the mantle away from Jeff Hathorn or Bob Pompiani and deem you, after a performance like that, the hardest working man with the strongest stomach in Pittsburgh sports media.
I didn't eat for like a day and a half after that, by the way. I didn't eat that night or the next day, but it was definitely worth it. All right, Chris, we got a big game here tonight, USA and Canada. Right now, that one is tied at 2, but it's exciting. You know, you try to compare it to another game, and I was thinking, and even some of the players are talking about this, I mean, this is like a Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. It's really turned into something special for the NHL. But here's what worries me. You know, I saw your tweet earlier today. I would love to see this every 2 years, non-Olympic years like the Ryder Cup. But here's the problem. If USA is not in the finals, how much of excitement would this generate?
I think it would be a little bit different. Obviously, USA and Canada going in as two heavy favorites to get to this point and then delivering on that, I think, is a massive boon for this, right? Yeah. If you had Sweden, Finland in the final, I would still watch. I think hockey fans would still watch, but they wouldn't be watching like they have. If Russia, who, you know, you would hope that ultimately things settle in the world enough where there's an invitation to Russia back into this. If you have this with Russia and you either keep it at 4 and you rotate out the team that finishes in the bottom and then you just have the added element of Russia being in there, I think that would ramp it up significantly. And I know they've got stuff built in. The Olympics next year, Richie, then they've got the World Cup 2 years after that. When I tweeted out my video talking about it, I just really, really want to avoid the NHL eventually, because I do think this will continue to do well. And it's been, I think, a success beyond almost anyone's imagination because these players care so much, Rich.
Yeah.
I just don't want them like 4, 6, 8 years down the road. Because think of how quickly the Winter Classic turned into like, all right, I'm kind of sick of this now. Like, we're doing this too much. I just don't want them to get victimized by that whole too much of a good thing temptation where they just can't resist the idea of all the good publicity this gets for hockey. Just keep it spaced out, let it breathe a little bit, and I think they will really reap the benefits of it for a long time to come if they keep it going on that kind of Ryder Cup schedule. Yeah,
I think a USA-Russia would probably be close to this. I don't know about Canada-Russia.
It's just how many countries, how many, Canada-Russia would be. I mean, there was the Summit Series in the
excitement
80s.
Here, do you think
Canada-Russia would still, Canada-Russia would still do like gangbusters here in North America. I mean, it's obviously Europe versus North America. There's going to be just natural tension when you have any of those three countries matched against each other. I would just say, like, I've seen people suggest that it might turn into the 6 nations face-off.
Yeah.
If Russia comes in and then you add a 6th, man, where do you get that 6th team from that like really belongs? Like,
Czech.
you're gonna go Slovakia or something like that. Like, you're gonna go not Germany, definitely not. So it becomes a little bit dicey, I think, if you get Russia back in as the 5th, to try to add in a 6th team that would be legit and viable in this kind of a competition. We've seen Finland succeed before. We've seen Sweden succeed before. So even though they didn't make it, we know they're bona fides. I would love to keep it at 4, like a rotating cast of 4, where there's actually stakes on staying out of the basement, and that team that finishes 4th, okay, you get bounced until the next rotation. I think that part of it would be pretty cool.
You could almost do a 5 nations face-off. I mean, it still sounds the same, 4 nations, 5 nations, and just add Russia.
Well, I don't know how round robins work. Do you? Like,
no,
I'm terrible at figuring out
there's got to be a way
round
to figure it out where you do a point system.
I just think if you have so Richie, I just think if you have like a team, if you keep it at 4, right? Okay, if you keep it at 4 and you almost are going to guarantee Canada and the U.S. are going to have a very hard time losing. If you're going to, because Russia has occasionally laid eggs in these situations, like if you're going to put stakes on like a game that right now otherwise would be meaningless, where the two teams that are trying to stay out of last place know that if they finish in last, then they're getting bumped 2 years from now, and they have to wait 2 more years to get back, like a relegation style thing. I actually think like keeping it at 4 and doing this long term and making this like a real long play for the NHL could be very, very beneficial. Just a very unique thing, and what we have seen it do, and I think it's just so hard for hockey to do this, and you hear hockey fans that kind of beg for it to happen, and it almost never does. It is the rare but very true example of something hockey related, like a hockey game, that has fully crossed over into the mainstream consciousness of sports fans. Like, it is a thing that's on every sports fan's radar. It's a thing everyone cares about. You've got all the football nerds on Twitter who usually don't pay attention to any other sport going, oh, wow, I've got to watch more hockey. That's a win. Just don't try to overextend yourselves and cheapen it in the process.
Yeah, it's the United States taking on another country, and I think that's the biggest attraction. Going back to what you said about the Winter Classic, that's interesting because I remember that first one. I was there for the Penguins and Sabres up in Buffalo.
That was a snow globe.
Yeah, New Year's Day game. It was unbelievable. But I think the problem with that is that, like you said, the NHL, now they had 20 Winter Classics every year. There were the outdoor games, and it just muddied the waters. It wasn't as special. If they would have just kept it at 1 every year, I think you might still see a success.
If they did the Ryder Cup, because I know you're a golf guy and so am I, and by the way, I am wearing some of my best.
It's a good one, Laurel Valley.
I know. Just wanted to flex a little bit, Rich. If they did the Ryder Cup every year, I mean this, it would make a huge negative difference for the Ryder Cup. Like the fact that you've got to have Europe gloating, America stewing after the last one, and the fact that America's got to defend on its home turf at Bethpage, that gap matters. Like letting it simmer and just letting it breathe matters. And I just think way too many sports, once they get an inkling of, oh, wow, we have a pretty good thing here, like people like this, the immediate urge and temptation and inclination is, well, we've got to do this constantly, more, bigger, better. And that's not how this stuff works. And you would think seeing diminishing returns would prove that to the people in charge, but it doesn't really work that way most of the time.
Yeah. All right, now to our live poll question of the night. Who has a better chance of making the NCAA tournament, Pitt or Robert Morris? I think it's Robert Morris because I think they can win the Horizon.
I think like the bottom line here is which team is clearly peaking at the right time, and Robert Morris, unless they suffer a shocking loss to the fighting Doug Gottliebs tomorrow, he'll be on his radio show, then he'll be coaching, which is just a surreal sentence to say. They'll be 11-1 in their last 12. They'll have one conference tournament home game. So I think that they are on a roll. They're playing their best ball. And there's some teams in that conference that can absolutely beat them. Don't get me wrong. They're not perfect.
Yeah.
But right now, they have a much clearer path than Pitt does.
All right, 412-575-2600 is the number. Get on board. Back in a couple minutes. All right, welcome back to the Ireland Contracting Nightly Sports Call. I'm Rich Walsh, joined by Chris Mueller for tonight's show, and this is our GMC tweet of the night. This is from the Pittsburgh Penguins, a forever friend to the captain. Sidney Crosby talked a little bit about Mike Lang. Mike Sullivan talked about Mike Lang. Mike Lang passed away at the age of 76 yesterday. He has been dealing with health issues. He hasn't called a game since 2021, and I know we've heard it here. I know you spent a significant portion of your show, I heard some of it, driving in today, having guys on. What was the theme? Like, what did everyone talked about him being the best in the business. I heard the Steve Mears interview on my way in and a couple other guys. But what was the surrounding theme of what everyone was saying for you?
Yeah, we spent our whole show on it, Rich, and you could tell a couple themes really shone through. The emotions that some of these guys, these are tough guys who played in the NHL, a tough guy sport, a tough guy league. Edzo was on with us, guys who were his broadcast partner. Edzo, we could tell, Andrew and I, nearly in tears. Like, you could tell he was choked up and he was just trying to hold it back, talking about Mike. And Bob Airy just crestfallen, even though he intimated, we knew that this day was coming. We didn't want to admit that it was maybe coming sooner than we all wanted. But he just still sounded like he wasn't prepared and floored to lose such a good friend. And they all talked about something that was so interesting to me, Rich. Like, there was obviously a ton of discussion about stylistically how he was as a broadcaster, his just incredible gift. I think the thing, even more than the catchphrases we talked about today, that shone through for his broadcast partners, for people who observed him from afar, like Doc Emmerich, was his incredible gift for how he used his voice as a tool, his sense of the action, his ability to kind of gear up when he knew something was happening. He never played the game, but he had this great sense for when plays are developing. I thought Paul Steigerwald, who spent the longest time next to him in the booth of anybody, said it best. He talked about Mike's love of blues and how he used his voice and his pacing and his cadence, his inflection, like a blues guitarist, just had like that master's virtuoso control of it and made him that much better as a broadcaster. And then just the one other thing, Rich, you talking about themes that came through, was that Mike was, even to his friends, a very private person. Not walled off isn't the right word, but guarded, and just kept to himself. But you'd think like, okay, well, maybe that's not somebody you would want to hang around. They'd also describe him as just a blast to be around. He kept certain, parts of his life very private, but otherwise incredibly generous with his time and gregarious and a fun guy to be around, even though he was quiet in many settings too. And I just think it illustrated just such a great 360-degree sort of picture of the man, a mentor to some, these players that knew him when they were on the team and he was the broadcaster, joining him in the booth and being so nervous and him having to bring them along.
Yeah.
I just thought it was a really interesting look at kind of all facets of Mike Lang.
Paul Steigerwald, he's obviously an interesting storyteller himself, and he told a good story about how Mike Lang kind of learned from Bob Prince, which is another iconic play-by-play broadcaster in Pittsburgh. I mean, there's a handful. I would say Bob Prince, Mike Lang, and Myron Cope are names, the top three names that I can think of right now that are involved with the team. Obviously there's Bob Pompiani and Stan Savran, John Fedko, Sam Nover, a bunch of other guys too. But what was interesting, what Paul was saying was that Bob Prince told him that he has to engage with the fans. He has to get the fans to love him, and that's what Mike Lang was he was brilliant at doing.
Yeah, I think Mike was great at reaching out, and a lot of the stories we heard were how generous with his time he was to casual fans, and how he would solicit them for suggestions for kind of the catchphrases. And I think "Scratch My Back with a Hacksaw," that's the one that stood out to me. The story of that is it was, I believe, a security guard, an older guy in his 70s, who very slowly wrote that phrase down on a piece of paper, and to hear the story told, Mike simply read it. And usually, like Richie, the success rate, the hit rate on these was like well under 1%. You know what I mean? He's getting hundreds of submissions, and he apparently read this out, simply put his arm around the guy and said, "You've done it. Like, you've done it. That's an automatic. I don't need to think about whether it works. It just does." And that's another just great story of how generous he was. You'd also hear, and I think this is the other thing that gets lost, is probably a good lesson for anybody out there that's a younger guy or woman who wants to get into broadcasting, right? You hear Mike Lang do what he did, and it's how easy it sort of sounded and how smooth it sounded. Just every single person, to a man, said the preparation he did, even in his final years broadcasting when he could have coasted, was just never-ending. It was off the charts. It was diligent, and that's why he was so good outside of the catchphrases and everything else, so prepared all the time.
And he did that when the Penguins weren't even good, before Mario Lemieux even arrived here. Which is kind of amazing.
Exactly.
And you talked about him loving blues and how, who was it, Staggy told you that maybe that helped him navigate through plays. And I know I heard Bob Airy talk a little bit about he was amazed at, because he's never played hockey, and how he knew the game so well. One of the things that I heard too is that, if they were in an away game and someone from Braddock or Penn Hills would come up to him and say, hey, can you say hi to my aunt and my mom or whoever, he would tell them to write it down, and he would weave it into the game somehow, which is amazing that he was able to do that.
Yeah, I've heard him do that, certainly. I mean, I just think that's the hallmark of a great broadcaster who's making that regional and local connection. When it's different than when you get these, every game in the NFL is essentially a national game if it's on TV. The one other thing, Rich, and I only ever did like college radio play-by-play, never bothered with it beyond that. But the fact that they simulcasted those games for almost 20 years until they split it back off radio and TV, and he went TV exclusive for a while. Mm-hmm. We know, broadcasting a game on the radio is so different. You're trying to be very descriptive to have the person listening at home create this mental picture in their head through your words. And on TV, you don't want to overtalk the action. Everyone can see it.
Yeah.
I think his ability to do a simulcast game like that and not overdo it for TV or underdo it for radio is almost unfathomable. And he was perfect at it. I mean, he really was. He called the action in a way where you could visualize it on the radio, but you didn't feel like he was overbearing on TV. I think that's the sign of truly rare talent.
Yeah, brilliance. All right, we got to take a break. 412-575-2600 is the number. Back in a couple minutes. Back to our live poll question here tonight. Who has a better chance of getting to the NCAA tournament? You can scan that QR code, but right now it looks like Robert Morris. Most of the people are agreeing with me, because here's what Pitt has to do. They have 5 games left: at Notre Dame, home against Georgia Tech, then at Louisville, that's the big one, at NC State, and back home against Boston College. They have to win them all.
They got to win them all.
Have to.
And then they probably have to win, I would say, 2 games in the ACC tournament. You can look at the net rankings. You can kind of compare and contrast from the last 2 years where they didn't make it and got snubbed last year and barely made it into the first 4 2 years ago. I think winning out is a must. Obviously, Louisville's the big fish there. And then I think probably what I feel safe if they won out and then won 2 in the tournament, in the ACC tournament. Safe isn't the right word, but I think then you can start having a very real conversation that, okay, this team deserves more of a benefit of the doubt than maybe people are giving them, because they'd also be on kind of like an 8 or 9 game heater, I guess, at that point.
Something
and
like
then
that's 2 plus that's 7.
You'd have to consider the way they finished the season a little bit too.
And Robert Morris, the only way they get in, they have to win the Horizon League. All right, thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate your time. See you next week. Hopefully we see you on KDKA News right now.